Hi, this is week 4. So welcome to week 4. This is the first grounded assessment week we're going to have. This week we're going to spend most of our time discussing the fractal, identifying the fractal, and showing how the fractal works in the market. The fractal is always our first initiating trade, and it's a breakout trade. So on any breakout trade, you're always buying the top or selling the bottom. So you have the world's worst trade location because you are selling the bottom and buying the top, and you also have the most potential loss. So this week we're going to find out how to locate the fractal and then how to decide which fractals to take and which not to take, and Professor Alligator is going to help us with that. So let's go over to the screen now and let's look at some of our goals for today. What we want to do today on our first day in week 4 is we want to review some of the essential concepts that we've discussed in earlier weeks. We want to know when to stay out of the market. This is a review also. We want to know the definition of a fractal, how it looks on paper. We want to understand how the alligator takes into account the current leverage of the market. 5, we want to understand the behavior of the market, and we want to know where to put our entry points on the fractal. So first, let's review some of the most essential concepts. Remember that chaos really means freedom, because you have the freedom that you don't have to massage and distort the incoming information to fit your old categories. And remember also that every time you hear the word chaos or think it or see it, we're going to substitute what it really means, which is new information. And remember that the most important question we can ask is, how do we handle new incoming information? You've seen this slide before. You're going to see it again because it's very, very important. Remember also that we spend a considerable amount of time talking about the choices that we have to use new incoming information. We basically have only 2. The one we're taught all the way through school, and the one that's most naturally and habitual with most of it, is to massage it, distort it to fit into old categories. There's a psychological axiom that says anytime you feel overwhelmed or bored, you're trying to fit new information into old categories. Throughout this study program, there's probably going to be times that you're going to feel overwhelmed, and there's also going to be times that you may be bored. But just remember that anytime you feel overwhelmed and or bored, it's because you're trying to fit new information into old categories. That's our most common way of dealing with new information. A better way is to let the new information organize itself. And that means letting go of your categories, and it also means creating some risk. I'm going to show you another slide now that you've seen to illustrate this, processing new information. And remember the illustration we used about the hydrogen atom. And it's moving around, trillions of them in this room. And there's also another atom there, the oxygen atom. And remember that we said when they come into each other's gravitational field, that creates new information. Then it becomes the hydrogen and the oxygen atoms intelligence. And even though this is the simplest organization I could possibly think of, they make what seems to be an intelligent decision. Most of the time, that decision is not to let the new information reorganize them, but to remain a hydrogen and an oxygen atom. Every now and then, they will allow that new information to organize itself, and what comes out is a transcending experience that turns into water. So remember that the most important question we can ask is, excuse me, what do we do with new information? We either fit it into old categories or we let it organize itself. One of the most important things we can also understand is how the market changes. In time, how does it change? The first thing that happens when the market changes, or before the market changes, is that there's a movement in the composite mass attitude of traders. We either get more bullish or more bearish. When that happens, we enter the market, and that produces a change in volume. When the volume changes, then that in turn produces a change in the speed of the momentum. It will either accelerate or decelerate, and that produces a change either in the speed or the direction of the momentum. And remember our illustration of the bowling ball last week. And then finally, that produces a change in price. So what we want to do is we want to get up this scale so that we trade in front of the change in price. So let's summarize what we've covered so far in this study program. We know about the current situation in trading, that most people lose, and very few people win consistently, and we want to join that small minority. We also know what the market really does. And remember that it always immediately finds that exact price where there is an equal disagreement on value and an agreement on price. We also looked at what chaos is, and remember always that chaos is simply new information which gives you a choice of how to handle that new information. Last week we talked about the 4 attractors, the point attractor, the circle cycle attractor, the torus attractor, and then the attractor that really controls the market and yours and mine's behavior, which they call the strange attractor. We also looked at how the market changes, what changes first and what changes last. And again, to repeat again and again, the most important question you can ever ask is, what do you do with new information? Okay, let's go forward then, and let's use Mr. Alligator, Professor Alligator, and let's go to the fractal. Remember, this is the first of the grounded assessments. This is the first of our 5 dimensions. It's very important that we get this correct because this is our first entry. As a matter of fact, we're going to spend not only today, but we're going to spend tomorrow reviewing what we did today. So let's look at the fractal first of all. Remember, we had a typical trading market. And remember from a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the typical trading market simply goes back and forth in a bracket, a range-bound market, about 80% of its life. Anywhere from 70 to anywhere from 70 to 85% of the time, it's in this bracketed market. We want to stay out of that bracketed market, but we don't want to lose any of these blind chicken trades, these trend trades, because that's where our money is made. But that only happens about 15 to 30% of the time. So if you're busy trading in this market here, you're going to give back most of your profits. And here, if you can stay out of the bracketed markets, your profits are going to accumulate. The most important aspect of the fractal, our first dimension, is we do not want to lose out on this trend trade. We want to be in every trend. And the fractal itself guarantees that we will not be left out of any significant trend move. And that's a big guarantee. Okay, let's go right then to the fractal formation itself. I trust that you have seen this in your study manual and in the book. The fractal formation is quite simple. Actually, if you hold your hand up in front of your face and hold your fingers up, the 5 fingers, it will look something like this. Here's the technical definition of a fractal. It's a series of a minimum of 5 consecutive bars where one of the bars high is higher than the 2 previous highs and higher than the 2 following highs. Now, the exact opposite is true for a cell fractal. This is a bifractal, and it has to have at least 5 bars, consecutive bars, where one of the bars has a higher high than the 2 previous or the 2 following. The 2 previous and the 2 following bars do not have to make a tent shape like this. This is sort of a pristine fractal. Let's look at B, the illustration in B. Here we have a bifractal because it fulfills the definition. You have a high that's higher than the 2 previous highs, and notice that the immediate previous high does not have to be higher than the high 2 bars back. And it is followed by 2 lower highs. So that fulfills the definition, the technical definition of a fractal up. And a fractal is basically, the market has come up to this point and it's changed its mind and it decided to come back down. Then it makes another decision, and if it goes above this point, and we usually allow 1 tick above this point, we will enter that market on the long side. Now notice an interesting thing here in this pattern on B. That is that we also have a cell fractal. The exact same bar is the center bar for a bifractal and a cell fractal. Remember the definition. A cell fractal has to have a low that's preceded by 2 higher lows and followed by 2 higher lows. A fractal itself can share fingers. For example, let's look at illustration C. Here we have 6 bars, and we have the first 5 bars which fulfill the requirements for an up fractal. We have 5 consecutive bars where the high is higher than the 2 previous and the 2 following bars. We also have a low bar here, and the 2 previous bars have higher lows, and the 2 following bars have higher lows. So we have an up fractal and we have a down fractal. And over here in D, this is excuse me, this is sometimes confusing. We have a high that's preceded by 2 lower highs. We have 1 lower high following it, but the second high has the same high as the fractal. So that is not a fractal up, but then we have a lower high. So anytime you have a bar whose high on an up fractal is exactly the same as the middle finger or the indicator bar here, it simply doesn't count. Remember that the definition is a minimum of 5 bars. Here we have 6 bars, and basically that one doesn't count. It still fulfills the requirement. We have a high that's preceded by 2 lower highs and followed by 2 lower highs. So look at that illustration very carefully, and then we're going to go through a fractal pattern 1 bar at a time to see how it forms. And here we are with the fractal pattern which creates a fractal signal. So let's go 1 bar at a time. This illustrates an up fractal, and the caret down illustrates a down fractal. Here's our first bar. Here's our second bar. Now, that's 2 bars, but we don't have a fractal now. We have a third bar. This may be a fractal, but it needs 2 lower highs on the right side of this high to be a lower fractal. So let's put in another bar. Well, that's a third bar. We don't have a fractal yet. Now we have the potential of having a fractal because we have a high followed by a lower high, and it's preceded by a minimum of 2 lower highs here. If the next bar is lower than this number 4 bar, we will indeed have a fractal pattern. And we're putting this up, making it happen, but we do have a fractal pattern here. We have a fractal bisignal because we have on bar number 3 a high that's preceded by 2 lower highs followed by 2 lower highs. Let's assume that the market proceeds on down, and we have another bracket, another bar that comes down, another bar that comes down, and a third bar comes down. Now we have a fractal cell signal. So we have the exact opposite of the bisignal. The bisignal fulfills all the requirements, and the cell signal fulfills all the requirements. We term this a bracketed market, and this is how we build a spider web. And remember, we talked about the spider web before. The spider web, we put a buy stop above the market, a sell stop below the market, and whichever one the market takes out, we're in the market in that direction. We have to put this in perspective with the alligator, but right now we're just looking at this schematic. So make sure that you understand that the market came up to this point, changed its mind, came down to this point, changed its mind, and we're somewhere in this area. So we would have a bracketed market, and we don't care which way the market goes. One of our indicators, one of our constant indicators that we've mentioned before, is whenever you look at the market, whenever you look at a chart, you should ask yourself the question, do I care which way it goes? And ideally you won't, because you'll be situated to take advantage of the trend no matter which way it goes. Let's look now at a variety of fractal patterns, and here's a whole variety of a mixture of them. Here's our pristine fractal here. Here's another fractal. Remember, this takes 6 bars because these 2 bars have the same high. In this illustration, we have 3 bars that have the same high, so this requires 7 bars to create the fractal. Here we have a fractal here and a fractal there, and either one of these could be considered the fractal because both of them have 2 previous lower highs and 2 following lower highs. Here is a fractal here. This is the first one because we have a high preceded by 2 lower highs, followed by 1 lower high, an even bar, followed by a lower high. So on this bar, when this bar is completed, that becomes a valid fractal. Now on the bottom part, you have just the opposite. So we want to look at that and study that, make sure that we can understand and locate a fractal very quickly. Let's look now at some fractal facts. And some of the fractal facts that we want to look at is, and this is interesting because what happens between any up fractal and a down fractal is always an Elliott wave of 1 degree or another. A lot of traders talk about the Elliott wave. Most of them don't like the Elliott wave because they say it's too subjective. It depends upon the person who's interpreting it. With the fractals, you can actually trade inside the Elliott wave without ever knowing what wave you're in. So that's a godsend for a lot of traders who are confused by the Elliott wave. When we get through with this program, you will not be confused by the Elliott wave. Let's look at another fractal fact. A fractal is always a change in behavior. It's displayed as a 5-bar sequence where the center bar, or group of center bars, has higher highs for the up fractals or lower lows for the down fractal. And one way to trade the fractal is that whenever the market exceeds the outside extreme, the high or on the up fractals and the low on the down fractals, is to simply go with that and go place a fractal buy, and that puts you in the market in the direction that the market's going to move. So what we've done today is we've looked preliminarily at the fractal, and tomorrow we're going to repeat some of the same things, and later in the week we're going to use practice charts, and we're going to see how the fractal works in some actual charts. Remember to do your 2 times of the AT and also your morning pages. Very, very important, and we'll be back with you tomorrow for more on the fractal.